We are in the heart of the Normandy countryside. It is here, surrounded by farmland, that the Feather Garden is situated. It is a poetic and subtle place, at the vanguard of the so-called natural gardens. In 1997, Sylvie and Patrick Keebel moved to this former farm in Hauzeville-Souris in Normandy, north of France. They had decided that this apple orchard would be the blank canvas for their new project. At that time, gardens in Normandy still featured classical borders and banks of pink and blue hydrangeas, but Patrick and Sylvie had something else in mind. They dreamed of wild grasses swaying in the breeze, of wild flowers, and of reflecting pools, a garden full of emotions, like an extension of the surrounding countryside. Thus began 20 years of shrewd gardening to bring this astonishing place to life, making it look both delicate and controlled. Today we will be exploring it in the company of a green team composed of grass lovers. Sylvie and Patrick Keebel, the garden's owners and designers, their gardener, Sébastien Damiens, ethnobotanist, Martine Berg, and garden and landscape historian, Hervé Bruno.
What appealed to us was that there were sheep on the land. It was a very flat place with an open outlook to the south, right down to the forest. The place was beautiful, even before we did anything to it. And what was great was that there was nothing here, or virtually nothing. Very often, when you get to a place, you have to dismantle what's there and rebuild it. We wanted to express ourselves very freely, so the fact that there was nothing here was a bonus, and that's what appealed to us.
At the heart of the Feather Garden's 3 hectares, the orchard is the central element linking the house to the countryside. On either side of this north-south axis, various themed gardens are laid out with surprising plant compositions. There is a different area of the garden reserved for every season.
This is the spring garden. It's mid-June, so we're about to slide from spring into summer, which means that some of the flowers are coming to an end. We still have this geranium, called Geranium asphodaloides. We let them pretty much establish themselves. For example, if you look over there, you have this Geranium asphodaloides, and beneath it, a masterwort has appeared. You see, that's a masterwort. So from time to time, with plants which tend to grow quite fast, you need to make sure you make room for other plants to grow up behind them. You need to keep an eye on them. We let them do their thing, but we need to balance things out. This here is the summer garden. We're right at the start, because it's still early June, so these are the first colours. Often in gardens with box hedges like this, the squares are closed, but we've tried to keep one side open so that the plants can spill out a bit. It softens the edges of something that's otherwise very structured.
From the start, Sylvie and Patrick decided they wanted a strong contrast. That meant giving this garden a tight framework to offset some wild planting. It is as if the proximity of the English coastline has wielded its influence over the strict lines of a French-style garden.
It's a garden of contrasts. The classical influences contrast with this orchard, which isn't exactly wild, because we work in it and treat it like a garden, but it leads to open countryside. And I think it creates a dialogue between the structured and the relatively wild. And I do mean relative. Actually, we've reorganized this orchard. These mown pathways mean that you can walk to the edge of the garden in quite an enjoyable and comfortable fashion and get a closer look at what's happening in the natural squares. If we do nothing, we end up with a lot of grasses here. The soil's so rich that the grasses grow to be over 1 metre tall. So one solution is to introduce this miraculous little plant called yellow rattle. When yellow rattle takes root, it tames the grasses. It creates space for other plants to grow. So, for example, here we've planted some perennial geraniums. If we create space for it to happen, the seeds fall onto the soil and germinate. So the idea is to control the growth of the grasses to give other plants a chance to grow. There are some nice things here that I haven't seen before.
Sylvie shows us the part of the feather garden which gave it its name. Here we are in the kingdom of grasses. It has taken a while for this large family of plants to win the affection of gardeners.
Obviously, we had to choose our plants to tie in with the theme. They needed to have delicate, feathery flowers, but not just that. The shape and the foliage had to correspond to the theme as well. And the backlighting is beautiful in this direction, which we noticed as soon as we arrived here. We have a theme for each area of the garden, so we thought, why not make the most of this backlighting? And that's where the theme came from. Slender, feathery plants which would stand out against the light and be shown off to their full advantage. So that's how the feather garden came about. The west is obviously that way. In the height of the summer, we sometimes get storms rolling in from the west, so we had to protect the plants. That is the reason for this box hedge. We didn't envisage a wave to start with, but the wind blowing through these plants creates a sort of wave effect. It's all done by eye, with shears. Sebastian prunes it, and we stand back and give him vague directions. He definitely has a deft touch. You just have to go for it and not look back. If you make a mistake, you end up with a gap.
For over 20 years now, Sebastien has been Sylvie and Patrick's trusty accomplice. It is he who deftly sculpts the topiary, prunes the hedges, creates the pathways, and maintains the elegant architecture of the garden throughout the seasons.
When you're pruning these round box edges, you really have to get on top of them and prune them the way you'd peel an orange from top to bottom. Then you carry on like this, all the way around. I work without a template, do it all by eye. I'm not actually sculpting a ball, it's more of a stud. You can see the stud shape there quite clearly because it's rounded right down to the base. And there, you can see quite clearly that it's stud-shaped.
It is summertime in the feather garden. July is the month when it is in full bloom. It is vivid and spectacular.
Here we are in the summer garden. This is the only garden where we've selected the colours. In all the other gardens, that's not the case. Here, we've intentionally restricted the palette to warm colours. You can't see any cold colours from here. There are no blues or pinks or anything like that. We're always on the lookout for reds in the summer. And we've come across a dahlia called Éole. It's a plain red dahlia with a yellow centre. It's best to have quite tall plants here because they need to stand out above the box hedges.
The feather garden is part of a modern trend in the art of gardening called the New Perennial movement. Its leader, Dutch landscape architect Piet Aldolf, advocates a combination of perennials to recreate the feeling of a natural landscape. This gives visitors the impression that they are surrounded by wild plants. What do flowers tell us about their gardener? This question fascinates Martine Berg. This ethnobotanist is an expert in the relationships that develop between plants and humans. She has noticed a recent phenomenon in France, a switch from manicured gardens to natural gardens.
The feather garden gives us a fairly harmonious view of nature. It has something of the Garden of Eden about it, so it is visually stunning. This garden reflects our response to the world. It is the new way of thinking about planting. We are in a natural garden. Gardens like this are relatively recent. They are in tune with nature and the environment, which has changed. Since gardens are always a reflection of society, today's perennial gardens express our new relationship with nature. But that hasn't always been the case. Horticulture developed from the 18th century, but especially in the 19th century, with an explosion in the number of varieties of plant species grown and cultivated. The palette became gradually more restrained throughout the 20th century, when there were only about a dozen species, producing a multitude of varieties. That sort of planting was much in evidence in both private gardens and public spaces. Then suddenly, in the 1980s, landscape gardeners became alarmed about the paucity of plants available. Gardens containing hardy perennials appeared around that time because in society there was a growing awareness of environmental problems and flowers were brought into that critical debate. It was an attempt to express a different relationship with nature. But there is a paradox, in that we want to both celebrate nature and yet still tame it. It is a bit like designing clothes or conducting an orchestra. There is a lot of human intervention in this natural garden. It has been tamed, but only on the surface.
Summer hots up as we approach August. The flower garden to the west of the meadow is in full bloom, at the height of the season. Here there are no grasses, just annuals and perennials which flower all summer long. The previous owner had a vegetable garden here. When we came, we extended it, put a fence around it and changed the theme to flowers. But we kept the structure. In other words, we kept the pathways and the layout despite the fact that we were extending it. We kept the rows you find on vegetable patches. We work with perennials and we plant them in rows. Annuals and biennials then grow up around them. Obviously, that creates a range of possibilities in terms of flowering. But it demands a huge amount of work all year round because we are constantly introducing new plants to bridge the gap between those which have finished flowering and those which are about to flower. We have kept what we planted in previous years, so 20 years' worth of consideration has gone into this place. It's a bit like a millefeuille, with 20 layers to feast on. And this diversity, as you can see on a sunny day like today, attracts lots of insects. There are lots of butterflies and insects because of this diversity, which means that there is always something for them to feed on. There is a new cosmos called cupcakes, which I have planted in a big wooden tub.
It is very, very beautiful. They have full, frilly flowers shaped like little cups. The colours range from white to the deepest pink, and they have very long stems, so they are always swaying in the breeze, which is delightful. There are references here to the fact that this used to be a vegetable garden. For example, these carrot flowers. If you look closely, the unopened flowers are like jewels. When they open out, they are still like jewels, only different. This year, a new hybrid of carrot plants has appeared. When it flowers, the colours range from pale pink to dark red. That's new, and it's really very interesting. You can see the alliums in there, in among the oregano, and that thing flowering there is a leek. This is the leek plant that was here when we came 20 years ago, which we have left to reseed in various places. So that's the original leek, but we've planted others as well, such as the rocambole. The rocambole you see here is very funny. It forms these weird and wonderful shapes. It's such a treat to discover these amazing things. Nature is so rich and diverse. It's a feast for the eyes.
Autumn comes to the feather garden. Soft light and warmer colours announce the metamorphosis. This is when the garden is at its most feathery. This season doesn't mean an end to the flowers, far from it. The most exuberant displays await us in the autumn garden, with a profusion of scents and colours.
We came up with the idea of recreating those childhood memories of strolling through a garden and all the plants appearing to be huge. We wanted to create the impression of being submerged by plants. When you walk down the paths, you've got plants coming at you from all angles. It's not to everyone's liking, but I love it. The plants hang over the paths. You feel as if you're fighting your way through them. And that's the impression that we wanted to give. Of course, there is a feeling of melancholy. Autumn marks the end of summer. We're definitely trying to prolong the season. We're saying, it's not over yet. There's more to come.
When people think of autumn, they think of asters. We have planted all the tall asters. They are all more or less the same height, so they need to be broken up a bit. In this garden, they're accompanied by tall miscanthuses. This miscanthus is one from our own selection. It's called Saturnia. The dramatic effect is heightened by the fact that this miscanthus has very curved flowers. That's what gives it momentum and rhythm.
Sylvie and Patrick have invited Hervé Brunon over. He is a renowned garden and landscape historian and a senior researcher at CNRS.
Do you know that plant? It smells lovely. We have no boundaries. We plant things according to the themes. We use anything that it is possible to use that will both suit the soil and tie in with the theme. I really like this solidago behind the box hedge. Nice, isn't it?
Sylvie leads Hervé Brunon through dense foliage to a secret place.
We originally intended to put a tall structure here, but we never found the inspiration. So we just left it for 4 or 5 years, unsure of what to do with it.
As they emerge from a tangle of herbaceous plants, the impression is striking. They are met with silence. In contrast with the exuberance of the rest of the garden, this miscanthus cloister is a zen and restful enclosure.
What characterises the feather garden and any other well-designed garden is the intelligent response to the site and surroundings. Often in a garden design, what matters are the trees, which give it structure, or the mineral elements and terraces. Here, it is herbaceous plants which provide the structure. That creates a rather timeless garden, which is renewed from one year to the next. It doesn't have the aging trees that a lot of parks have. It's that idea of a garden which seems ageless. There is no one way to design a natural garden. But what has really asserted itself these past 20 years is the essential role of plants. In public spaces, we used to see concrete structures or quite harsh things. Now, there is a renewed interest in perennials. Dutch landscape architect Peter Udolf, for example, is interested in phytosociology, which examines the way plants coexist and compete with one another. He came up with the idea of composing gardens that take into account the specific needs of plants and the way they interact. One thing that never changes is that gardens are places where the most recent knowledge is applied. That has been true throughout the history of gardens. The owners don't use any photosanitary products. They work with compost, which is obviously essential. It is a way of recycling vegetable matter, and it allows seedlings to sprout in flower beds and banks, creating a dynamic of renewal and a balance between the plants you put in and the plants which spontaneously appear. When you wander through the garden, you see that there is a multitude of insects gathering pollen. So there is obviously a rich biodiversity, which is both cultivated and spontaneous.
Observation means realising that nature sometimes provides the answer. A plant might reseed itself and we'll keep it. We see it as a bonus. We hadn't thought of it. Nature came up with the idea. But sometimes it is our idea. If we see that a display is not balanced and that the rhythm is not good, we move the plants around. There is a subtle interplay between the two. There is, how can I put this, mutual observation and respect. You really need that respect. We respect animals and human beings, but we need to respect nature and plants as well. We are working on that. It's not easy, but it's rewarding. You have to keep observing and being attentive. Being immersed in nature makes being alive more enjoyable. At any rate, we love it. We are in our element here.
As autumn wears on, the flowers gradually die off. Sylvie gathers the seeds with a view to sowing them in winter. Just before the first day of November, the plots of the meadows are meticulously mown. This coincides with the end of the season. This work is done to improve biodiversity as the mixture of plants release their seeds, dispersing them on the natural seed beds, which regenerates a richer meadow.
I think a garden has the same lifespan as the gardeners who created it. Once they've gone or can no longer manage it, and other people come into the picture, it becomes something else. I think it's very difficult to keep a garden alive once the gardeners who created it have gone. I don't think you can undertake a project like this without a love of gardening. Our whole life is ruled by the garden. I don't think you can do it unless you love it.
Je crois qu'on le fait pas, quoi. C'est pas possible.